آریانا افغانستان یگانه شبکه تلویزیونی ملی افغانها در خارج از کشور.
توانا بود ارکی دانا بود، ز دانش دل پیر برنا بود. دلوی او بخونکی خدای پنامه گران و قدرمن دوستانو سلام علیکم هیله د چرو خوشحال هوارم سی او دینن روزی د پوهنه را به اخبارونه دیر کرد است ز مریم اسماعیل سلایم او د اخبارونه تاست د آریانا افغانستان د نړیوالې شبکې څخه ورته کوم خدای دې وکړي چې دینن روزی د پوهنه را د اخبارونه معلومات هم ستاسو د استفاده ورسیږي. بینندگان عزیز و ارجمند برنامه دانش روشنایی است. با آرزوی صحت و سلامت شما برنامه امروز آغاز میکنیم. امیدوارم شاد و صحتمند باشین و در هر گوشه و کنار جهان که هستین هفته خوش و پرثمره را در کنار عزیزانتان به خوشی و آرامش سپری کرده باشین و امیدوارم که برنامه ما را از هر طریقی که میبینین، اگر از طریق فیسبوک میبینین با عزیزانتان هم شریک بسازین، چون برنامه فیسبوک لایف هم هست و ما هنوز فرصت نیافتیم که بتونم ما هم با عزیزان شریک بسازن به گروپ های مختلف، ولی شما عزیزان اگر شریک بسازین خوشحال میشم. خب دوستان عزیز ارجمند، باز هم قسمی که میدانیم هم ما شما در 3 نوامبر یک انتخابات بسیار تاریخی در ایالات متحده امریکا صورت میگیره که همه جهان در موردش صحبت میکنن و یک انتخابات بسیار تاریخی و مهم و ضروری است برای همگی در سراسر جهان و ما باید که از حق شهروندی خود استفاده کنیم و ما حقوقی که داریم و حق رای دادن داریم از او باید استفاده کنیم و باید بسیار آگاهانه مسئولیت شهروندی خود که بجا کنیم. ما وقتی که در یک مملکت میزبان زندگی میکنیم حق داریم که رای بدیم و باید که از او حق خود استفاده کنیم و البته آگاهانه استفاده کنیم و نگذاریم که دیگران بر ما تصمیم بگیره. خود ما باید معلومات خود در هر قسمت اضافه بسازیم و با چیزی که به نفع عام باشه باید فکر کنیم و با نظر به اون شرایط از حق مسلم خود استفاده خوب کنیم. و بسیار خوشحال هستم که امروز 2 جوان بسیار موفق خوب را با خود دارم در برنامه امروز که ما را همراهی میکنن و بسیار جای خوشی است که هموطنان عزیز ما یعنی حاضر میشن که وقت خود در اختیار برنامه میتن، مخصوصا جوانان ما که واقعا زحمت کشیشان و سهمگیریشان در برنامه قابل قدر است و انا گفتن نباید بگذارم در هفته آینده هم مهمانای خوبی داریم که به شمول دکتر صاحب نادیه جان هاشمی و انشالله که هفته آینده هم در این مورد صحبت میکنیم و البته دکتر صاحب نادیه هاشمی و دکتر صاحب و آقای آرس ترین و فرشته جان طیب مهمان هفته آینده هستند و حالا میپردازیم به معرفی 2 مهمان خوب ما، دکتر علی علومی که اسیستنت پروفسور تاریخ اسلام هستند در و البته در پن استیت یونیورسیتی و دکتر علومی در رشته تاریخ از UCLA از یونیورسیتی اف کالیفرنیا ایرواین درجه دکتری خود اخذ کردن و همچنان بچلر دیگری خود از رشته تاریخ از UCLA اخذ کردن و دکتر علی علومی همچنان یک نویسنده و میزبان یک پادکست به نام هد آف هیستوری هستن و دلیلی که آقای علومی را اول معرفی کردم این هستن که اونا لطف کردن و سخاوت کردن و مهمان بعدی ما را امروز ما معرفی کردن که من از اونا آگاهی و شناخته نداشتم که واقعا بر من جای افتخار و خوشی است که آله با خود دکتر نورا صدیق هم دارم. دکتر نورا صدیق که البته از دکترای خود از دوک یونیورسیتی در رشته پولیتیکال ساینس و یا علوم سیاسی اخذ کردن و همچنان درجه ماستری را در رشته پولیتیکال ساینس از یونیورسیتی هاروارد اخذ کردن و فعلا هم در رشته پولیتیکال ساینس در یونیورسیتی پرینستون البته ایفای وظیفه میکنن و تدریس میکنن پابلیک اینترنشنال افیرز و یا که امور عمومی و بین المللی را تدریس میکنن و همچنان دکتر نورا صدیق هم مقالات و چپترهایی در کتاب‌ها نوشتن و یک خانم فعال هستن، خانم جوان فعال هستن. بسیار خوشحال هستم که عرض با خود دارم. خوش آمدین دکتر نورا صدیق و دکتر علی علومی. خوشحال هستم که با ما هستین. جای افتخار است که شما جوانان موفق و خوب و بجا رسیده را با خود داریم.
تشکر.
البته همکار عزیز، چون که ما با وجودی که همیشه ما میگیم که اقلیت از خانما است، ولی به اصطلاح ریورد یا بخشش آقای علومی همیست که یک میمار بسیار خوب و ما معرفی کردن. سوال اول از آقای علومی مطرح میکنم و آقای علومی باز هم تشکر از شما که لطف کردین و مرا امروز دکتر نورا صدیق معرفی کردین و اونا حاضر شدن که امروز در برنامه با ما باشن.
تشکر. Thank you very much. با اجازهتان من انگلیسی صحبت میکنم.
بله البته ایره خودم خوب اجازه میدم، منتها یک فی چارجتان میکنیم. درست است؟
فی درست است.
خب دوستان عزیز، البته من خودم هم چون دکتر علی علومی در ایالات متحده آمریکا تولد شدن و دکتر نورا صدیق هم به سن 5 سالگی به ایالات متحده آمریکا آمدن و به افغانستان هیچ وقت نبودن و ما پیش از برنامه کمشون صحبت کردم، یعنی با اندازه کافی انگلیسی صحبت میکنن. امرای علی جان ما قدر زیاد صحبت به فارسی نکردیم، ولی امرای دکتر نورا صدیق دری بسیار مقبول صحبت میکردن، بسیار با فصاحت. اما موضوعاتی را که شاید قسمه که در موردش اردویشان باید صحبت کنن، ضرورت است که باید به انگلیسی صحبت کنن، شاید که مکس صحبت کنن، شاید که دکتر علومی با انگلیسی صحبت کنن. چیزایی که ضرور باشه بر ترجمه ما حتما به دریس میگم و هموطنان عزیز ما به ایالات متحده آمریکا هستن. وقتی که ما شما حق رای دادن داریم و از یک باید استفاده کنیم، باید تا اندازه به زبان انگلیسی هم آشنایی داشته باشیم که از برنامه مستفید شیم. تشکر دکتر علومی باز هم از شما.
تشکر.
اگر لطف کنین در مورد انتخابات سهم گرفتن در انتخابات 2020 صحبت کنین، بسیار خوشحال میشم.
The 2020 election that's coming up in just a week actually is probably one of the most significant elections that we're facing in 50 years. The stakes couldn't be higher, from healthcare to housing to the safety of minority communities, foreign policy. All of it are up for grabs with this particular election. As we've seen over the past 4 years, a sort of destructive presidency, we now have an opportunity to voice our opinion on whether to continue that presidency or elect someone else. And we do that through the ballot box, and we do that through voting. So this couldn't be a more important election.
بسیار ببخشید یک لحظه دکتر علومی، چون آوازتان کم پخش است و همچنان هم کار عزیز در فیسبوک این چیزی را نمیبینیم. فیسبوک آن نیست و به ما میال یک هموطن ما تکست هم کردن که در فیسبوک ما هنوز فیسبوک چی نیست و همچنان آواز آقای علومی را ما درست نمیشتم. اگر لطف کنین که فیسبوک هم اگر درست بسازین که بتونیم دوستای ما طریق بله اینال فیسبوک درست شد. تشکر. و اگر آواز بلند کنین که ما آقای علومی را درست بشنم. تشکر بسیار زیاد آرشیا جان.
Salaima Mishnaran, can you hear me?
بله عالم اشتم.
Okay, so as I was saying, this is the most significant election in probably several decades, probably since the time of the civil rights, from foreign policy to domestic issues like housing, immigration, healthcare. All of these are up in the air, and we've seen a sort of destructive presidency over the past 4 years, and now have an opportunity to voice our opinion. And we do that through the ballot box by either continuing the presidency or by electing someone new to the most important office in the country. And so this is a significant election, and the consequences of this are going to set American domestic and foreign policy for decades to come.
بله واقعا یک انتخابات بسیار ضروری است و بسیار مهم است که اساسی است، بسیار برای همه ضروری است که باید بریم و یا چی که اگر ابسنتی بالت باشه از وقت باید این کار کرده باشیم و دمی ویکند باید تا فردا رو باید این کار تمام کنیم، در غیر از او باید بریم به صندوق های رای خود بتیم. و حالا اگر دکتر نورا صدیق لطف کنید بگوین که چرا فوکس امسال انتخابات امسال زیاد در مورد انتخاب رئیس جمهور است. درباره سیاست های لوکال چی فکر میکنین؟ آیا برای افغان هایی که مقیم امریکا است کدام تفاوت داره یا نداره؟
سلام علیکم، تشکر بسیار زیاد که مرا امروز میمان کردین که شما بتونم گپ زنم صحبت بکنم. زیادتر گپ خود به انگلیسی ترجمه میکنم، خاطر درس زیادتر به انگلیسی بود. مگر مهم است امسال که او شما طرف elections national باشه و چی با خانه ما می باشه. So when we think about elections, what happens at home in our local neighborhoods matters as much as what happens nationally. What Dr. Olimi was discussing in terms of national elections, this year the moment and the presidential administration matters because the current president in office does not respect the democratic process the way it should be respected. So there is an infringement on rights that has not happened in the past. So we have to pay attention to the elections because we want to maintain the democracy for the country and generations to come. I was speaking to my class last week about what is the definition of a democracy. The definition of a democracy is a peaceful transition to power. ما مردمای افغانستان یه بس خوب سعی میفهمیم که if we've seen it ourselves با افغانستان که when one person wins the election, does a transition happen? Does it happen peacefully? This is the first time that historians, political scientists in modern era are sort of really concerned about whether this is going to happen. At the same time, the one group of people that can protect us are our state officials and our local officials. So we have to make sure that our mayors, our city council, our governor, our state legislators are on our side. We don't know what's going to happen with the national elections. We have protections in place. If we live in Fremont, if we live in Irvine, that can come from the local level. So the local politics matters because if we cannot trust the federal government to protect our rights, we have to rely on somebody. And a place like the state of California, where we have a lot of Afghana reside, places like Texas, where we also have a lot of Afghana, Virginia, the states have a lot of power, they have a lot of funding. So we need to make sure we're paying attention to what's happening on a local level, because if we cannot trust the federal government to protect us, there are ways. We see this with the COVID-19 pandemic. The federal government's response has been awful. There's no strategic plan on how to protect us, but states and local jurisdictions have done a better job of protecting us. So if we can ensure that we have people in place that can protect us on a local level, it ensures that the future of where we live is healthy, not just for ourselves, but our future generations. So it's really about protection at this point. It's not even about us advancing our interests. We need that safety. We need to pay attention to the local and state politics as well.
واقعا این بسیار نکته مهم و اساسی است. ما عموما فکر میکنیم که تنها انتخابات مربوط انتخابات ریاست جمهوری است و همیشه همون فوکس ما می باشه و در بسیاری وقت تا دیگه با موضوعات دیگه که دستیت ما کی ها رو باید انتخاب کنیم با او فکر نمی کنیم. قسمی که دکتر صدیق گفتن شاید که امکان داره رئیس جمهور کسی شود که ما و شما هیچ اصلا به اون نفر یعنی رای نداده باشیم و اکثریت ما به اون شخص رای نداده باشیم. اینال ما با کی تکیه کنیم، اتکا به کی داشته باشیم. باید که ما یک پشتوانه دیگه داشته باشیم. باید دستیت خود در حکومت مرکزی، حکومتی که جایی که زندگی میکنیم با او اتکا داشته باشیم، کسایی انتخاب کنیم که به نفع همه باشه، به نفع ما و شما باشه. امو شرایط زندگی برای ما قسم عیار کنه که چیزایی را اونا را بتن و چیزای طرفدارشان باشه که برای مفاد همگی باشه. اتو یک شخص متعصبی که باشه و اگر ما انتخاب رای نتیم با مو فرض کنین ما بر گورنر خود رای نتیم، برای که بگویم که خب معلومات نداریم. این گناه خود ماست که معلومات نداریم. باید معلومات حاصل کنیم که این کدام شخص بهتر است که گورنر امو ایالت که ما هستیم انتخاب شود که بر از او رای بدیم. به خاطر چانس ازی که ما رئیس جمهوری که انتخاب میکنیم او برنده شود شاید بسیار کم باشه. اقلا در جایی که زندگی میکنیم امو حکومت خب باید طرفدار ما و شما باشه و ما را سپورت کنه. این بسیار نظر البته بسیار خوب است. دکتر علومی شما در قسمت کدام گفتنی دارین؟ چیزی اضافه میکنین؟
Bale, at the local level, not just state officials, but the local level also determines propositions. So policies that are going to affect our communities most directly are going to be determined at the local level. So take, for example, California, Proposition 15. Proposition 15 is a proposition that determines that if businesses make $3 million or more, that a tax will be placed on them that will help support schools. This is an issue that's going to affect all Afghans in California. If we want to have good public schools, if we want to have decent textbooks, if we want to have an education that is world class, then that proposition has an effect on us. Proposition 21, rent control. So Dr. Sadiq is absolutely right. The local level matters. And this is something that we often forget because we pay attention every 4 years to the national election. We pay attention to when the president comes up for election or re-election, but we aren't paying attention to what's going on at the local level. The local level with its elected officials, with its policy proposals, with its different propositions are all going to have an immediate impact on our lives, even as the president comes and goes. At the end of the day, the president sets the national agenda and deals with foreign policy. But the policies at the local level are going to affect our families first and foremost.
بسیار خوب، تشکر. خب آقای علومی، چون کمره سرتان است از شما پرسان کنم که impact on foreign and domestic policy اگر در قسمت صحبت کنین خوش میشم. البته زیاد من نمیخوایم ترجمه کنم دوست عزیز، چون که شما انشالله که همه با زبان انگلیسی آشنایی دارین، وقت ضایع میشه، از او خاطر میخوایم که میمونای ما صحبت کنن. بفرمایید.
تشکر. Yeah, this current elections impact both on domestic and foreign policy are huge, particularly for us as an Afghan community. The Afghan community in the United States is a minority community, but it is a community that is deeply impacted by things like healthcare, and healthcare is on the ballot. Who gets elected into office in a few days from now is going to determine whether we will have access to affordable healthcare or not. And a lot of Afghans, many of them, require that, whether this is healthcare that they get through work or healthcare that they had through the Affordable Care Act, or they're on Medicare. All of that is going to be held up with the domestic decisions. In regards to foreign policy, we're looking at Afghanistan first and foremost. This is the longest war in U.S. history, nearly 20 years of war, and who manages that war will determine the lives of Afghans. Now, the reality is that Democrats and Republicans are both deeply committed to an American empire that costs Afghans lives. But it's also undoubtable that in the past 4 years alone, the past 3 years of the Trump administration has been far deadlier for Afghans than the entirety of the Afghan war. In 2016 alone, there were 4,000 Afghan civilian deaths and 8,000 injuries. That was more than 8 years of the Obama administration. We can recognize that Democrats are also committed to things like drone warfare, committed to things like the destruction of Afghan bodies abroad. We can also recognize that we are dealing with a commander-in-chief that is far deadlier than anything we've experienced. And so the way we vote will determine what American foreign policy will look like going forward, and it will determine the impact here at home. Will we have access to quality education? Will we have access to quality healthcare? Will be safe in our communities? Will we have to deal with things like ICE and immigration services who are going to be using the powers of the state to target vulnerable communities? Immigrant communities don't just come across the border. Immigrant communities are Muslim communities. They're Afghan communities. All of these are going to be up for election here in 2020.
دکتر صدیق شما در قسمت چیز گفتنی دارین impact on foreign and domestic policy.
Tashakkur. What Dr. Ulumi was saying about, I want to begin with Afghanistan. The biggest difference is accountability. Who is going to listen to us? We see similar preferences in terms of what the US government wants to occur in Afghanistan. But the difference is that at least with an administration that is not the Trump administration, the voices of Afghana that are citizens will be heard. So I'm not going to say it's going to make a completely drastic change, but you see right now that women are not included in the peace talk process that the Trump administration has been advocating for, right? A systemic inclusion of half the population, right? So when we talk about foreign policy and domestic policy, the term accountability, Mariam John, accountability بترین نمیفهمم صحیح لغت که تشریح کنم.
I'm having a senior moment. I'll look for accountability.
Yes, but for those
accountability. یعنی مسئولیت باشین ما خوب صحیح براتون پیدا میکنم.
نه I'll continue explaining.
Go ahead. Yes.
Accountability. At least the current administration ignores us. They don't care what we think. They don't care about our voice. No matter how much we say this is harmful, they don't care. The Biden administration has already begun conversations with Afghana. They have begun in America, and they are listening. To the degree that they're going to implement what we want is a different story, but at least they're listening. And I think that difference matters. And I think that at least we can poke at the system. I am not someone that's like, I'm not part of the Biden administration. I'm a political scientist. I teach. But when we talk about who is going to listen to constituents, there's a big difference between the Republican administration right now and an incoming Democratic administration. There are at least gestures that, hi, we care, we're going to listen. And for Afghana here, we've lost a lot of lives, like as Dr. Ulumi was saying, in Afghanistan in 2016 alone. That matters. At least we can ensure some safety. At least there's a conversation about safety. And then domestically, two things matter, I think, that we were talking about. Immigration. People here right now that are going through the green card process or trying to get citizenship, that process has been delayed. من اینجا آمدم امریکا 5 ساله بودم. من سیتیزن نشدم تا که وقتی که 21-22 ساله بودم. And that was good. That was a fast process. I cannot imagine right now a دختر مثل من با 5 سالگی بیاید. At what age are they going to get citizenship? If it took me 17 years to gain citizenship when times were good, what does it look like now? Duomi, healthcare. We have a lot of seniors, Fremont, Los Angeles, healthcare, Medi-Cal. Like if you're in California, you're lucky. If you're not in California, you're in Virginia or Texas, how are we going to afford our prescription drugs? This matters for our senior citizen population, and they want to reverse healthcare policy right now with the current administration, and if they get reelected, the accountability is gone. So thinking about Afghanistan, the immigration process, healthcare, these are three things that really, really affect our communities in deep ways, and they might be harmful. So we can only hope and امیدوار داشته باشیم که یک Biden administration will bring some kind of change, and at least people will begin to listen.
بسیار خوب. و از اون کارهای خوبم که ما accountability چون یک کیورد بود، مسئولیت گفتم. دکتر سیبوریا و مسعود جان برام تکست کردن مسئولیت پذیری معنای مکملش است. واقعا مسئولیت پذیری بسیار چیز مهم است. درست میگین و دوستای عزیز شما هم اگر سوالایی دارین میتونین که تلفن کنین بر مهمانای ما. دکتر علومی اگر شما لطف کنین بگوین که ways Afghan Americans can exercise political power.
Yeah, this is probably the most important question. Like all minority communities, like all vulnerable communities within the United States, the most powerful tool that we have is the right to vote. This is the way we can express our support or our displeasure with our elected official. In a democracy, power rests with the people. Power doesn't rest with any select group of people, but with us as a collective. And exercising is the bare minimum. Now, voting is not the beginning and the end of political power. Direct action, lobbying, all of these protests, resistance, these are all vital for political exercise. And Afghans should be involved in a variety of different levels: direct action, protest, resistance, lobbying their elected officials. But the bare minimum that we can do is vote. The bare minimum is showing up, and it's the easiest thing to do, and it is one of the most clearest ways that we can express our political power. We can have a say in how our government is run, who is running it. We've had some unique experiences of the past few years as we've seen more and more people run for office, people from the Afghan community, people from other minority communities. We've had new initiatives that come forth. The idea of Medicare for all, for example, is now a mainstream talking point, something that 10 years ago would have been unthinkable is now possible, and that comes from people voting, people pushing. And the voting doesn't just happen at the presidential level. It starts at the local level, ensuring who's on your local school board, what your children get taught in school, what type of measures are passed in your city and your county and your state, what type of propositions are passed, who's your state legislature, who's your senator, who's your representative, and then who's the president. So there's all sorts of levels. I mean, I used to take my grandfather, he passed away a few years back. My Baba John would never miss an election. The second he became a citizen, he would inform himself at the local level, he would inform himself about the state representatives, about his Congress people, about who was president, and I would take him every time, and he would take his time, and I would translate the different ballots for him, and he would read through it, and he would cast the ballot, because for him, this was a way of exercising power. We are, at the end of the day, we are not going to have the same power as corporations. We're not going to have the same power as lobbyists. We don't have millions and billions of dollars in order to influence, but what we can do is vote. And so this is the beginnings of political action, but it's not the beginning and the end. We can also get involved in various forms of activism, grassroots movements. We can get involved in direct action. We can get involved in coalition building, whether with the Black Lives Matter movement or a variety of different grassroots immigration movements that are currently ongoing. But in a few days, we have one of the easiest opportunities to express that political power, and that is by casting our vote in the ballot box.
بسیار خوب. دکتر صدیق شما اضافه میکنین چیزه؟
Malia, when Dr. Olumi was speaking, I was thinking of two things. One, we exercise a responsibility to the government here on April 15th when we turn in our taxes. We already give portions of our money to the government. So now we have a choice. Do we involve ourselves in where our money goes, or do we let other people make that decision for us? And so when Dr. Olumi is discussing voting, voting is really our way of saying, I've already invested in this country, not only by physically being here. My God, when we get our paycheck every month, we give portions of our money, tax-paying dollars. April 15th, we all know that day. We're already invested in providing funding to the government. On November 3rd, we make a decision of where our money goes and who we use it for. If we want that money to protect our Afghana ba America, we go and vote November 3rd. So we have a decision, we've already invested. How we choose that money to be funded and where it goes is a decision we make November 3rd. So the political process is important. Voting is powerful for that reason. The second thing I would add to that is یک چیز که افغانا بسیار خوب هستن با تلفن گپ زدن صحبت کردن یک چیز است که we do all the time. Bilal Khordem, he worked for the US Senate, and one of the things he said is The U.S. Senate office in Washington, D.C., they get phone calls from constituents all the time. When you call your senator, Farzan, you live in California, you call your senator. The intern, the staff member in the Senate office has to take down your name, your zip code, and the issue they called about. And then they have weekly meetings and they discuss how many people called because of what issue. Oh, this is important. We had 200 people from Fremont calling about X issue in Kabul, even though this is a California senator. Suddenly, this matters to the senator in California. So we, as Afghana, already use our community for other issues. It's a simple phone call. I think the most urgent thing right now, and the reason that the three of us are in conversation today, is because of the elections next week. So I really want our focus to be on voting next week. But after that, we know how to use a phone. We know how to remain in touch with loved ones, not only locally, but across, nationally and internationally. Use that phone to call our senator. It matters. I see my brother's young, 22. The number, he says, he's like, I was so surprised when he first started working. It was his first job out of college. Then the amount of attention they pay to when people call is like, they actually have to discuss this with the senator. So I think we underestimate and we don't trust the fact that our voices matter. When we speak up, they pay attention because we are already invested. We pay the taxes April 15th. They have to listen to us. We have to use our voices. So I think that political participation looks different, but the most important thing is the upcoming election next week. But after that, there are several strategies. And the last thing I'll say is Dr. Ulumi works with a lot of Afghans that I respect, the Afghan Diaspora for Equality and Progress. They're a very young organization that's been doing very important work on behalf of Afghana. I respect them, I look up to them because they're working on the civic engagement space. So if you don't know, I turn to them when I want advice and I look at the work that they're doing. We have organizations that are doing the work in the United States and we should look to them and the resources they offer if we are confused about how to get involved.
Thank you, Dr. Siddique. Can I just add two things real briefly? She mentioned the Afghan Diaspora for Equality and Progress. If people are looking for ballots to be translated, if you go to adeprogress.org, you will find the California ballots and the national ballots translated into Dari and Pashto. So if language is a barrier, we now have those ballots right there translated for people so that they have easy access when they go to the ballots box. You can just go to adeprogress.org. But Dr. Siddique brought up something really important here, and this is the benefits of having political scientists amongst us, is talking about the power of calling your senators. This is most evident in just the past few years. The Affordable Care Act was saved by people calling into the Senate and flooding the phone lines. The Affordable Care Act was saved by one senator's vote. Now, why does that matter? Because everybody requires healthcare. We all require healthcare, and having access to affordable quality healthcare is the difference between life and death, especially in the time of a pandemic. But even outside of it, if you think about it, the average pregnancy, let's think of just the average pregnancy, costs anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000. This is unique. Most other Western countries don't have this experience, but in the United States, the average pregnancy, $12,000 to $18,000. That means that you will go into debt if you have a child. The average breaking of a foot, like if you break your foot, it costs $25,000. You will go into debt if you fall down the stairs. But if you have the Affordable Care Act, then now you have an opportunity to not go into debt. Now you have an opportunity to have access to good healthcare. And that was saved by people making the effort to call into their senators. So there is a real result when you are politically involved. Afghans benefit from the Affordable Care Act and from access to good healthcare. And that was saved by activists who were able to pick up the phone and push their senators.
بسیار خب دکتر علومی اگر شما بخوایم باز هم سوال کنم که برای افغان ها و برای کسای دیگه منوریتی های دیگه کدام موضوعات بسیار مهم است که the election و یا any other election, what issues are the most important for us?
I think the most important issues are going to come down to kind of three. The first is always going to be healthcare. That is a universal condition. Whether we're Afghan or whether we're from any other minority group, access to affordable healthcare is extraordinarily important. And there are some really great conversations being had about universal healthcare. making Medicare for all accessible. This is important. If this happens within the next few years, this can be the difference between people going into debt when it comes to having injuries and people being able to have great health care without it. I travel a lot. I've traveled to England. Most of my archives are in England. And I've gotten sick in England, and it cost me nothing. It cost me nothing. Whereas an ER visit in the United States is costly. And we know people who refuse to go to the ER because it will cost them too much. They simply can't afford it. So first and foremost is going to be healthcare. The second for me is going to be immigration. Like other immigrant communities, we are deeply, deeply impacted by the policies at the national level when it comes to immigration, whether it is ICE or the Border Patrol, how immigration is dealt with, green cards. These are all extraordinarily important. And Dr. Sadiq talked about the delays when it comes to green cards, the delays when it comes to the immigration status and citizenship. I work at the university level. I can tell you that there are professors that are no longer able to come into the United States, students that are unable to get visas. We are living in a moment that is deeply anti-immigrant. So this is an important aspect for it, not just for new Afghans who were impacted by the Muslim ban enacted by Trump. They were impacted right off the bat. We had Afghan families in LA stuck at the airport, unable to come into the United States, but also the suspicion that is placed on Afghans, the legal blocks and hindrances that are placed. So Afghans, even who have been here for a while, need to see immigration as a top priority. And then the third, I think, would be a matter of rent control. This is more of a local matter rather than nationwide, but rent control and affordable access to housing is extraordinarily important. We are a young immigrant community. We're a community that is just on the rise. Most of us come from working class backgrounds. We're slowly having inways into the middle class. So housing as a right is very important. So these three issues are crucial both in this coming election and in coming years.
دکتر صدیق به نظر شما چی مهم است؟
I agree with Dr. Alumi that healthcare and immigration matter. I think that those issues are fundamental, especially, like I said, we have an elderly population. The thing that I would add is the economy in general. We also have a lot of small businesses. There are small business owners. I know that it's consistent across the community. You see a lot of hardworking families when they come here, that building small businesses matter. So who is going to build an economy that protects us and our interests in terms of like building that off the ground and having small businesses function? You know, it's interesting because small businesses is a reason that sometimes people want to vote for certain individuals. But if you think about the protections, the grants, the way that certain things are preserved, we really have to think about the economy, about jobs, and about who is going to protect small businesses and who cares about them and what kind of grants are possible for them. And so that's the only thing I would add, is that we have a lot of small business owners in our community. So the economy, in the way that we care about protecting small businesses suffered drastically this year because of the pandemic. You know, these big corporations, they can suffer blowbacks, but I'm really surprised at the number of small businesses that have to shut down because of the current situation and the federal government not having a strategy in place to make sure that they can have an economically viable opportunity. So the forthcoming election also matters because we want to be able to make sure that small businesses can survive 2020.
بسیار خب دکتر نورا، اگر شما لطف کنین قسمی که نظر به معلومات ما شما دیگه اواخر یک راپور را پابلش کردین به نشر رساندین برای لیدرهای نو امریکا در مورد immigrants that are in state legislatures. چرا فکر میکنین که state legislature یعنی مهم است و what are important trends Afghans should pay attention to? چرا؟
State legislators, like we were discussing at the beginning, when you think about right now, we're thinking about protection and who's going to protect our rights. So when you live in a big state like California, Virginia, Texas, we have a lot of Afghana historically in California and Virginia, but we also have a lot of Afghana growing in places like Texas. the funding that they have available there can protect the citizens, and you can build institutions within the state level that do services like Dr. Ulumi was discussing, rent control, pass policies that protect individuals on a local level in terms of housing, in terms of protection, even on immigration, so people don't get deported, in terms of the type of healthcare services. California has a very sophisticated healthcare system that protects residents in a way that I wish people. I grew up in Ohio. We don't have such a sophisticated system in the legislature in Ohio. The important thing is that first-generation immigrants, people like my mother, my grandmother, this report, basically what I did is I assessed, there are 7,383 state legislators in America. So if you look at state legislators as a parliament, right, just on the state level, there's 7,383. Only a fraction of that are first and second generation immigrants. In California, they are sizably representative, and they have a healthy representation. And you see progressive policies in California protecting residents in a way that you don't see in places like New Jersey. New Jersey also has a large immigrant population, but they have I think they have 2 legislators that are immigrants in their state legislature. Out of the 7,383 state legislators, we have 1 Afghan. That's it. Safia Wazir in New Hampshire. Safia John is a very important example because her election, she's new to America. She came as a refugee, she settled in New Hampshire, and she ran for office in New Hampshire. We need more people like Safia John running for office. This report was done in collaboration with New American Leaders, which is a nonprofit organization which encourages first and second generation immigrants to run for office and give them the tools to run for office. I want to encourage my khala and kaka that are listening to run for office. I think the young generation are great, but I think that the generation above us, a lot of whom are probably listening and watching with us, you have so much wisdom from surviving war and coming to America that you know more about how local policy works than you probably give yourself credit for. You see people in Minnesota who are Somali and running for office. I've interviewed so many women that are mothers of 5, mothers of 6 that are now city council members in places like Tennessee and Missouri that are from different countries that are Muslim. And they're doing excellent jobs because they have a mother's intuition. They take the mother's intuition into local office. So when I speak about this, I'm not speaking to the young generation that are my age. I'm speaking literally to my aunts, uncles, the mothers and fathers listening. You have an intuition that protected your children, and now you're reaching a point where you understand the system in a way that you don't give yourself credit for. And those are the people I would love to see run for office, particularly in state legislators, because you know the areas that you're investing in. So I think that report, I'm happy to share the link, shares a lot about places like California that are doing a good job of having immigrants in office, but there are a lot of places that I want to live that we need you to run for office, particularly places like Texas, New Jersey, New York. New York has a sizable Afghan population and 0 political representation. Those are the places we need Afghana to run for office.
بسیار خوب. دکتر علومی، شما در این قسمت پبلیکیشن راپوری که دکتر صدیق پبلش کرده حتما خواندین، چیزی گفتنی دارین؟
Dr. Siddique's report is probably one of the most important reports for us to read and understand right now. It talks not just about, and kudos to, this is why I always praise Dr. Siddique, because this is such an important piece of scholarship, because not only does it pinpoint the areas in which we are severely lacking when it comes to representation, but it also offers it as an opportunity. This isn't just saying, oh, look, everything is broken. This is an opportunity to improve that. We often as a community talk about the need to protect our rights, the need to protect our interests, the need for small businesses to be protected, for schools to be protected, for our schools to be funded. We need to stop relying on other people to do that for us. It's important for us to get involved there. And this doesn't have to fall on the millennial generation. This can fall on the older generation as well. They have the opportunity to run for office. State legislatures, local populations, school boards, these are all important entryways. I think we often think in the national terms. Everyone's running for Congress. Before you even think about running for Congress, think about running for your state legislature. I mean, the state legislature has such an immediate impact on our lives. And I'll give you one very overt example, and that's in education. We Afghans pride ourselves on our focus on education, right? Particularly Afghan women are highly educated amongst immigrant populations. There's a very high level, high percentage of Afghan women who end up with degrees. But the reality is that education is constantly being defunded in this country, depending on where you are. Even in a progressive state like California, the UCs, the University of California, where I graduated from, are considered one of the best public school education systems in the world, and yet it's been defunded year after year after year. Tuition has increased. When a student started in the early 2000s, they could ostensibly see their tuition around $5,000 to $6,000. It's up to $25,000 a year right now. $25,000 a year. An average student getting a bachelor's degree. This isn't even talking about our traditional 3 doctor, lawyer, and engineer platform. Just a bachelor's degree will end up in $80,000 in debt. $80,000 in debt. That can be determined at the state level. When funding flows for colleges, you have access to better education, you have access to better funded education, you have smaller school sizes. All of this is determined, and this can be something that Afghans can participate in. Rather than see it as something that someone else will fix, we can participate in that state legislature, which is why Dr. Siddique's report is so important, because it highlights a weakness nationally at the state level, but also an opportunity for us to get involved.
بسیار تشکر، بسیار لطف کردین. آقا دکتر علومی، یعنی کدام موضوعی هست که من شما سوال نکرده باشم شما بخواین در موردش صحبت کنین؟ Is there something I have not asked you? If you want to add anything, because we have a few more minutes. If you would like to, each one of you want to add anything, feel free to do so.
I think the questions have been very thorough and we've covered quite a bit. I just want to reiterate the importance of this upcoming election and the need for our participation. And the 2016 election was determined by a few thousand votes. About 20,000 in Michigan, about 15,000 in Pennsylvania. That swung the Electoral College. Even though the popular vote was won by Clinton, it swung the Electoral College. And if you want to think about the difference that makes, that's the difference of 10 people in a block. 10 people in a block. That's an Afghan family right there for you. One Afghan family voting per block can swing this election. That's how important it is to participate. And when we don't participate, then we're left vulnerable to other people making decisions for us. So when people think that our voice can't be heard through elections, that voting doesn't matter, just remember that a handful of votes swung the 2016 election and likely will have the same impact now in 2020. So it is crucial for us to get involved, have our voices heard, and reject the sort of growing totalitarian and fascist components of the Trump administration. Even I don't consider myself a particularly pro-Biden candidate, but the differences could not be more stark. This is the difference between our communities being safe and our communities being targeted. And that's what's up to vote on November 30th.
بسیار زیاد تشکر از وقتتان، از معلومات خوبتان و از همه که مهمتر از اینکه دکتر نورا صدیق امروز معرفی کردین. بسیار زیاد تشکر از شما. خب دکتر صدیق، how about you؟ کدام چیزی اضافه میخواین کنین قبل از اینکه با شما خداحافظی کنیم؟
یک چیز میخواستم بگم نیستی که اولا Dr. Olimi discussed the swing states. I ran the analysis actually because I'm a numbers person. So I had my research assistants run the numbers, and the percentage that Dr. Olimi was talking about, the swing states turning blue, turning in the favor of Afghanistan, because honestly, that's our only option right now. Literally, when I look at the numbers and I crunch the numbers, we literally, like Dr. Olimi said, an Afghan family shows up. If all the eligible immigrant voters, the first generation voters that are now citizens, show up to vote, we will literally be the reason that these states vote and change the election. We can be the superheroes and save this country. We've saved this country before Afghanistan. We can do it again if we actually use our voice and vote. Because of that, one of the things is that people know that our vote matters and they want to deny us the right to vote. There's a hotline, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. It's 1-866-687-8683. We will share it by Joseton on your channel. It's a nonprofit hotline. And basically, this hotline is a team of attorneys. If you're having trouble voting on election day, this hotline will guide you. And last thing I will say is that help your elders. So myself, Dr. Ulumi, when you were talking about your Baba John, I'm sure you helped assist him to make sure he showed up on election day and spoke with him. One of the things that my mom made me promise is that I'm going to help at least one elder in my family vote on election day. So I'm going to vote, and I've made the commitment to help at least one other person make it on election day. So if you're young and you're listening, or if you are our parents' age and able, make sure that the elders are aware of what's on the ballot and have the means and access to show up that day. I think it's crucial and vital, and it's something that we literally can swing this election in favor of us, because right now it is really a matter of our freedoms being protected or not. So thank you so much for having us for this.
Thank you. بسیار زیاد تشکر. نمره تلفن 1866 what else?
1-866-687-8683. But not by English, it's just our vote. 1-866 OURVOTE. If you use that, it's 687-8683. I actually called them on Thursday with my brother because he did not receive his absentee ballot when he had asked for it. So we were trying to figure out how he could get his ballot. So I've used the number myself last week, and they're very kind and friendly, and they'll even text message you if you're not able to speak on the phone, to help you figure out how you can sort of ensure that you vote by Wednesday.
بسیار زیاد تشکر دکتر صدیق از شما و دکتر علومی از اردویتان، از وقتتان، از معلومات بسیار خوبتان. امیدوار هستم که در آینده باز هم شما را داشته باشیم. البته
تشکر مریم جان.
بسیار زیاد تشکر از اردویتان. دوست عزیز، قسمی که مهمان عزیز ما گفتن که رای دادن حق مسلم هم با شما است و باید از این حقوق خود استفاده درست کنیم و نه تنها رای دادن برای رئیس جمهور ضرور است، بلکه در لول استیت هم که به هر استیتی که هستیم ضرور است که به گورنر، به هر موضوع دیگه، به پروپوزیشن هایی که است باید خود در موردش آگاهی خود بیشتر بسازیم و معلومات داشته باشیم که یک راه درست و منطقی بتیم و انتخاب کنیم. و با امیدوار هستم که همه هموطنان عزیز ما برن روی صندوق های رای و یکی از طریق میل رای خود بفرستن و خودشان باید در میل باکس نندازن. ولی آقای علومی این قسمت باز هم یک معلومات بتین که اشتباه نشه که باید ابسنتی بالت در میل باکس باید نندازین. بله
ابسنتی بالت میتونین ترن کنین با خود voting place. خود پست آفیس میتونین یا the voting local voting center you can drop it off.
بله، به خاطر که کدام اشتباه افراد صورت نگیره بسیار ضرور است. بازم تشکر از اردویتان. شبتان خوش. خب دوستای عزیز ارجمند، از شما بینندگان عزیز ارجمند هم که برنامه را از هر طریقی دیدین، از شما هم ممنون و سپاسگزار هستم و مخصوصا از همکارای ما که ناجیه جان آصفی کبیری، دکتر سبوریا و مسعود جان که لطف کردن. از کمکتان تشکر. و هفته آینده قسمی که گفتم در برنامه دکتر نادیه آشمی و آقای حارس ترین و امیلازه فرشته جان، بله فرشته جان طیب که بسیار جوان زحمتکش و پرکار هستن و اونا رو هم با خود می داشته باشم. بسیار امیدوار هستم که برنامه هفته آینده را هم ببینین و تا هفته آینده شما را به خداوند بزرگ میسپارم. هفته‌تان خوش و با آرامش امیدوار هستم که سپری شود. فراموش نکنین که رای بدین.
توانا بود ارکی دانا بود، ز دانش دل پیر برنا بود. آریانا افغانستان یگانه شبکه تلویزیونی ملی افغانها در خارج از کشور.
مراسم تدفین